Presence is important, even if it's a large organization. I visited all of the departments one by one. It took about 1.5 years to do it the first time. When people were promoted, when they were recruited, I welcomed them. I sold them Finland and Aalto, all kinds of things. Presence was really essential.
Hello, and welcome to the Entrepreneurship podcast series by UIN. In this episode, Tuula Teeri, Associate Partner at UIN, spoke with Tuula Teeri, Professor of Biotechnology and former President of Aalto University, about how Aalto supported bottom-up entrepreneurship through strategic investment, participatory leadership, visible recognition, and long-term commitment. Her experience offers practical lessons for leaders seeking to turn academic autonomy into institutional momentum.
Hey, welcome everybody. I will be talking with Tuula Teeri about building the Entrepreneurial University, and we'll be reflecting on her time as the founding president of Aalto, amongst other leadership experiences that she will share with us. Very rich vein of leadership experiences that she's had. So looking forward to that. My name is Tuula Teeri. I'm an associate professor at the Institut Mines Telecom Business School in France, as well as an associate partner at UIN. I'll introduce Tuula. Tuula Teeri is a professor of biotechnology and a former president of Aalto University, where she led the institution from 2010 to 2018. Prior to joining Aalto, she served as the deputy president of the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. And since then, she has been the president of the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences, as well as a board member of Business Finland. But more than anything, and just speaking with other leaders, university leaders around Europe, she really is internationally recognised as a leader in innovation and entrepreneurial universities, and also just known for strengthening connections between higher education, research, industry, and society through her contributions. So welcome, Tuula.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Todd.
I'm really looking forward to speaking to you today. It's always a pleasure. One of the things that I really have admired about you over the years is that you're so often able to convey calm and logic to others in times when it feels chaotic. Perhaps you can explain to me at least, how do you do that?
It comes very much down to listening. You really have to listen to the people that are experiencing this chaos. You have to try to understand what is the core of why they're worried or why they feel it chaotic. And then talking is almost equally important. So trying to sort of persuade not to be stressful, not to be provoked by their sometimes quite unpolite critique and things like that. And then since you're working in universities, then logic always works. So if you have a good argument, you can explain why things might have to be done in a certain way. People usually, they buy these kind of arguments. And then, of course, you have to be empathetic. You really need to be kind to your people. So those things help. Walking with the people, it's a job.
Yeah, not an easy job, I can certainly say that. I've known you to say this, that leading academics is like herding cats or moving a graveyard. And I just wanted to understand a little bit more about which of those do you think is true and why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you compare cats and dogs, dogs usually obey what you say and cats usually don't. So that's one of the things that, it's this concept of academic freedom that the professors usually, they take it so that it extends to all areas of university life. And so basically, it's like, an organization that everybody is an entrepreneur. And this entrepreneurial spirit of professors with the academic freedom makes it leadership for them sometimes quite irrelevant. And then, of course, there's this critical thinking bit, which means that, whatever you say, the first argument is, yeah, but, they always have a counter argument, and then, which is good. But when you have to get something done in a direction that is not shared, it takes a lot of discussion, and the moving graveyards bit is, that one of my professors was saying when we talked about this, said, the thing is that you don't get any help from inside. And then another professor said, yeah, but they don't object either. So it's like, these are they're quite good metaphors of how it is to lead universities.
No, I can relate to both of them actually, and that's why I wanted to ask you about them. It was interesting, and I might pick this up a bit later. You mentioned that academic work is, and in some ways, is very entrepreneurial. So I'll pick that up as That's a subsequent conversation. But what I wanted to do now is just explore your time at Aalto University, because when you arrived, you were tasked with bringing together 3 independent schools into Aalto University, which, by the way, is now one of Europe's leading universities. I guess I just wanted to hear a little bit about the story about how that came about. Why do you think you were chosen? And then also, maybe explain a little bit about the environment at the time, and then also some of the immediate priorities that you set.
Putting together 3 autonomous universities, it's a task, that
One's hard
maybe
enough, right?
not many people have done, overall in the world. And I mean, it's mainly because it is a scary thought, especially when you do it to save money. In our case, what made it a little bit easier is that we were not doing it to save money. We were actually given a lot of resources to do this merger. So that was one of those things, why it was possible. I could always show the money. So that's a good way of motivating professors. But why I was chosen, I really honestly don't know, because I mean, I
It's
had
very
been doing.
modest.
No, I really don't, because I mean, I think that people probably had their eyes on when I started big research centers or something like that. I can't be my job as a pro-rector or a pro-vice chancellor because I had only been in that job for half a year when the first question came. But I think that maybe people just saw that I usually get things done. That's my best explanation. I had been part of the research assessment, which was done to the universities before the merger. So maybe I said something clever there. I don't know. I was quite surprised to be
I'm sure you
be
did.
asked, actually.
And maybe just the setting that you found yourself in, perhaps you could explain, because that's an extremely complex setting. And how did you then determine what the sort of immediate priorities that you had? How
Yeah,
did you decide on those?
Yeah, the scene was really quite like you described, chaotic in the beginning because there were people that were extremely enthusiastic about, they thought this was exactly the right thing. And then there were people who said, this is doomed, this is never going to work, It's just a typical discussion in a university. And some people were even hostile, especially the other universities in Finland, because we got a lot of resources and they didn't. You can imagine the feelings they had. So it was actually quite chaotic. What was helpful in the beginning is that this merger had actually been planned already quite well before I came. And the reason I took this job was because I agreed on the plans. So I didn't have to start from scratch. And the first thing that I did was, that I had to recruit my leadership team. And this was one of my conditions that I would not have taken the job if this was an election. And the new university law in Finland made it possible that I was able to actually recruit my team. I said, I'm not going into this kind of a job if I can't recruit my team. And so that was really important. And I mean, the thing is, nobody can do this kind of thing alone. So I had people who had been working in the preparation organization. I had people, who were excellent in scientists, excellent academics, but I also had people who came from outside universities, like for finance and HR, because these are not the strength areas of traditional universities. So that was definitely my first action and absolutely necessary. Otherwise, if that had taken a long time, then we would never have gotten off the ground.
Well, I think that's a great segue into maybe a conversation about the principles of leadership. And perhaps you can talk a little bit about participatory leadership, because you were referring then just a moment ago to the fact that you had to include others and you can't do this alone. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the principles of your participatory leadership and maybe just give some examples.
The thing is, like I said, that the professors are very independent, they're very autonomous, they love their work, and they don't like bureaucracy. So one of the things is that, you somehow have to make them part of the change. You have to make them want this change. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And, the thing is, like I said, that the professors, they criticize everything. I started the professors' council now because we had this law dictated. We have to have a president, we have to have a board, we have to have a kind of a collegium, but there was no forum for professors. And so I said, this is impossible. We need to get the professors on our side. So I started the professors' council. 5 people came, 5 out of 375 professors. They just weren't interested. And then those 5 that were in this council meeting, they just criticized. They didn't say anything positive about anything. And it became my kind of usual answer to this kind of critique. I said, I'm quite happy to, listen to your problems, but I will only act if you have a suggestion. How can we do it better? And that was actually really useful. Everybody knew that if they come to me and start complaining and they don't have a suggestion, then nothing will happen. There was one professor once who came and said, I don't think this is right, but I haven't yet come up with a better solution. That's when I thought, okay, I'm winning this. And so that's one. And then the forum that you mentioned at some points, was this Aalto Leaders Dialogue, because you need to have the people that are actually working in the departments, in the teams. You have to get them on board. And so we had this Aalto Leaders Dialogue that collected all the leaders at any level of the university. We were many people in those forums. And then we discussed, and it's almost the only way to get the communication working all the way if you get people speaking about it in their own environment.
And how do you balance the need to lead, as in to set the agenda and to set the vision? How do you balance that with this participatory leadership? In other words, you're inviting people into the conversation.
Again, I say that because the planning process started before the university was founded, there had been something like, 500 people who have been, we had these ambassadors who had been actually putting the ground in place. And so these people were, of course, invaluable because they knew why we were doing these things. So out of the 2,000 people in the staff, in the faculty and staff, plus 20,000 students, I had 500 friends. So that was the balancing act. So then you just have to work with the ones that are believers, and then it spreads. And like I said, balancing with a lot of money is easier than taking the money away.
I
So,
can imagine.
yeah.
And at what stage did you realize, okay, this is working? And what were the sort of signs that you could point to say, okay, my leadership style here is making a difference, is actually working?
It was really difficult in the beginning because we talked a lot about loyalty and things like that. You're working for an organization. Professors work for themselves, so they weren't very enthusiastic about this idea. But to say that to get the people, especially the deans of the schools, so in the end, we had 6 schools that were supposed to be and were academically autonomous. But then they still had to be promoting this change and the merger. So that was the really important thing, that you get the deans on your side. And that was a process. So in the beginning, we had some that really didn't like it. And it was really difficult for them to change their behavior. And I heard all kinds of stories about what was said in the departmental or school meetings, behind my back. But then, gradually some of those people retired, and then I was again able to recruit people that I thought were going to be able to do the job. So once we had good deans, then they were recruiting good department heads. And a little by little, you could see that the opposition was lesser than the enthusiasm. You never get unanimity in a university. There's always
Right.
someone who is unhappy, but that's the way universities are. But we got the things done. Another thing that we did almost in the beginning, in the first year, was that to make a very clear roadmap. What are the main goals? We had about 10 points on that list. And then we made a kind of starting from the grounds, moving on and making a timetable so that we would be able to reach our goals within about the 10 years.
It's really interesting listening to you talk about some of the attributes of essentially good leadership. So having goals, converting them into a vision and a roadmap. You talked about buy-in, getting buy-in from various stakeholders. You
Right.
talked about recruiting the right people and also getting ownership. I guess what I wanted to ask is, how do you then live that day by day to make a culture, an innovative or an entrepreneurial type culture? What are the sort of things you have to do to reinforce that? Because I can
Yeah.
imagine there's a lot of that.
Yeah, culture is difficult to create. It becomes when things are done in the right way. And of course, we made a lot of mistakes in the beginning as well. So it was a process. We set one of the goals that we set to the leadership team. We were about maybe 10 people. And we said, we know that we are going to be succeeding in this if the people are proud, if they feel pride in belonging to this university. And we were reinforcing this by really recognizing achievement. So when people got something, we would celebrate. And this is not a Finnish strength. Most of, like Nokia, you read about the history of Nokia, which is the telecom company that really conquered the world. They said they won a big deal, and okay, they might have half a glass of champagne or something. We collected everyone and we celebrated. So this was something new in Finland, that people actually are recognized for their achievements, not just, when they make mistakes, but they're actually recognized when they succeed. And I think this was, it created positivity in the organization and started, okay, so I do my bit, I'm responsible for my part of this change, and people will see when we are succeeding. And most of the times the success was something multidisciplinary research center, or I'll talk later about the student achievements and things like that. It was not something that we had dictated, but we made visible every success that we could.
One of the things that occurs to me is that you're in a somewhat of a privileged position, because you are one of the few people who have led a large organization. And I guess that brings its own complications, because one thing is to have a team of 20 or 30 where you can perhaps be personal. So maybe you can just refer to some of the difference in leading a large organization, some of the complexities. I think you've spoken previously about communication and things like that.
Presence is important, even if it's a large organization. And that's why, the leadership team was so important, and also the trust that it's difficult for a scientist to let go of details. But this was something that I learned within a couple of weeks, that there is absolutely no way I will be able to manage these details. So the question is, what is my role then? And I took my role to be an advocate for the change, both internally and outside. And to be in all these difficult discussions, we had to put all these 3 universities on one campus. And so we had all kinds of discussions. I participated in all of them, all the big discussions. I was always present in the Aalto Leaders Dialogue. I visited all of the departments one by one. It took about 1.5 years to do it the first time. And I met the key professors. We had to sort of align, the salary systems for the universities. So I took one by one all my professors, and not all, but the ones that needed a raise. So presence, it is really important. And when people were promoted, when they were recruited, if they left, I had the exit discussions. I welcomed them. I sold them Finland and Aalto, all kinds of things. Presence was really essential, very important. Yeah.
Ready to unlock the entrepreneurial potential of your students, staff, and institution? Our training programs help you embed entrepreneurial thinking across education and research. Whether you're supporting academics, running incubators, or shaping university strategy, our courses give you the insights to make entrepreneurship thrive. Explore upcoming programs at uiin.org/training and empower the next generation of innovators.
Yeah, just listening to you talk about being present in all these different activities, I guess your calendar was full. And these days you've got a little bit more time to exercise your brain and not be so present in meetings. But one thing I wanted to do was just reflect on the entrepreneurship component of the leadership that you have displayed, because I think I really wanted to pick it up because of the fact that Aalto University is now established as a leading university, but it isn't particularly well known for entrepreneurship. If you look at some of the things that have emerged from Aalto, including the Aalto Entrepreneurship Society, or otherwise known as Aaltos, the startup sauna. They always got to have a sauna. I love the fact that you've chosen that as a to pick up the culture, the Finnish culture. But Design Factory, it's an internationally adopted model. You have Slush that's come out of it, which is now one of the biggest startup events globally. Did you intentionally try to embed a feeling of entrepreneurship in the institution? What has led to that, do you think?
This was a goal, of course. It was one of the early names for Aalto University was Innovation University, which everybody hated, But
I can imagine.
But we never left this ethos. I think the freedom of people to do what they think is important and what they can do is a strength in universities. And this is what we use for the entrepreneurial activities. And I would say that really boils down to one professor, Kalvi Ekman, who was actually, he had a course on product development since 1996, right? together with Stanford and so forth, where they actually, the students, it's like problem-based or opportunity-based learning much before everybody was talking about it. So that was the start of Design Factory. And when we started Aalto, I actually put quite a lot of resources in this so that he could actually have good space, good resources, possibilities for expanding the activities. And that's why we now have it all over the place. A lot of criticism. Why does all the money go to the Design Factory? And I said, because they're doing a really good job. And it's exactly by the book what we should be doing. The entrepreneurial movement came because the students realized that we're going to be entrepreneurial. We're going to be an innovation university. And they really took it to heart. And this was mainly the business school students in the beginning, but then they got all the other ones. And when I started at Aalto, I say that university students, they are incredibly clever. They are selected in Finland, so not everybody gets to universities, but they are actually chosen. And so you let them do what they want to do. And sometimes they went a bit overboard, but then you correct, But I mean, they really, so Aalto Entrepreneurship Society started all these things. And Slush had been organized, I think, once or twice before Aalto started. And then the students took it over. And it's still run by the students. And if I had been organizing this kind of effect, or if my leadership, I promise we wouldn't have techno music into these events. But that's become like a signature. It's an entrepreneurial forum that is extremely popular. It's extremely useful. It works really well. But the format, how it was actually done, is all students.
I guess that's wanted to explore that a little bit more because of the fact that you oversaw this entrepreneurship movement. So how, if you had to give advice to other leaders, how could you encourage entrepreneurial thinking and activity on a campus or within the university? I'm just going to make a point for everybody that we have previously spoken, and you modestly said, I just listened to the students, gave them some space and got out of the way. Now, that's very modest. I think you did a little bit more than that, but at the same time, maybe you could give some tips to other leaders, how they could encourage this activity.
Yeah, I was eating ice cream with them. That's one of the things that they still remember. So somehow they still felt that the distance could president. But I tried to reduce the distance, And I mean, the thing is, you have to treat, like I said, the students were the origin of the entrepreneurial culture in Aalto. And then they actually organized some excursions, for instance, for professors in Stanford. So the students took the professors to Stanford, not the other way around. So it was really important how to encourage and don't criticize them too badly when they make mistakes and give them a lot of praise when they actually succeed. Aalto, by that time, partially because of the students, partially because of the professors that actually also became very entrepreneurial, we have created 3 unicorns since Aalto started. Some of course, that the groundwork was done a long time ago before. It's not something that you can plan. And we tried all kinds of things from top down, which never worked. And then these bottom-up initiatives just took more and more space, work much better. So I guess it has to do with setting the goal. We want to be an entrepreneurial university. We will see if you are doing the right kind of things. I don't have any better answers. It did happen because we let people do what they want to do.
I think you've provided a really nice framework because you said basically we set the goal, the vision of what we wanted to do, and then we basically look for bottom-up activity and recognized it, gave it space and gave it life, I guess. And I think
but there were also quite a lot of initiatives that didn't work. And those were silenced at some point. So it is a little bit of a selection process as well, that you encourage the ones that are going in the right direction, and then you try to distinguish the ones that don't.
I think that's something that is really interesting is your attitude to failure, because you've been a university president, and I don't think we often hear university presidents talk too much about failure and have the sort of attitude that you have. So maybe you could explain your attitude to failure. And do you think we need to get universities more accustomed, more embracing failure?
Embracing failure is a bit difficult concept because, of course, we want them to succeed. But, the thing is, let's take a star professor who has had a huge research center, and then the funding dries out. Not because they failed, but because the funding does dry out sometimes, quite often in universities. So what we did was that we didn't say them, oh, you have to try harder to get some more funding. We said, we will give you a bridge funding. So while you're looking for the new funding, we will give you some help. And that meant that they didn't fail because we knew that they were not going to be less competent because they lost the grant. Well, it ran out, but we gave them more money. It was the same thing that when new professors were recruited. And again, I must say that this is a privilege I had because we had this extra funding. But it also created a culture, that it's better to have more money for those who can do something instead of distributing everything evenly around. So use the money strategically. New professors that were applying for jobs, we gave them a real visit, we gave them an offer like American universities do. This was unheard of in Finland, in Scandinavia before. And we said, you can put higher, what kind of resources do you need? And that decreases the possibility of failure because they actually did have a good start. A lot of time, these young people, they're thrown, okay, you can have your salary and a bit of a lab. Yeah. But we gave them some resources they could have. And I asked if they needed some particular equipment, usually around 300,000 euros. Yeah, 300,000 euros was the upper limit. So you have to facilitate for the people to do their work, and that decreases. And then when they fail, it's not the end of the world. Try again.
Yeah, it's really refreshing to hear a university leader here express those words, especially for someone who comes from an entrepreneurship background. I wanted to take a final change in direction and just talk a little bit about the future of the university, because we've done over the years a number of future university thought books. I think you've contributed to a couple of them over the years. But what is your biggest concern when you think about the future of universities?
Look at the United States, that's your answer. What's usual in almost all countries is that the university funding goes up and down because the politicians don't always understand the long-term value of universities for everything. The education is so important to keep up the good ideas and people creating things that, will bring the society forward. If you look at Harvard or something like that, it's a really difficult situation in the United States right now. And we have to fight it. We just have to somehow keep the university paradigm going on. It's a responsibility. I think that's something, easier to do in some countries than others, but it still needs to be maintained. And then the other thing is that with the respect or appreciation of universities, it also leads to economical problems. And so one of the things that, I think especially in Scandinavia, I try to advocate to say that make philanthropy part of the university funding system and don't let them govern your activities, but use the money strategically. And we had this really big endowment for Aalto University, and the way we used it was not to use the actual capital, but we used the return on the investment to balance the dips in the funding. And already during my time in Aalto, we had quite big dips, but we could continue because we had these extra resources. And I think this is almost the only way that universities can maintain the stability of funding. And for professors, you can't today do something and tomorrow you do half of it. That's not the way you create long-term innovation, or that's not how you create value. So those two things, defend university as a paradigm and make sure that you can balance the government cuts. This is especially in Europe, but apparently in the United States as well these days.
We have a question from Matt Dowling, so I would just like to pose that to you. Looking back, was the success of Aalto driven more by the vision itself or by your ability to find and empower the right people to carry that vision? Any tips on identifying those champions who change the dial?
You mean the ones in the leadership team?
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah, okay. The key for me was because we had a very democratic system of selecting even rectors. It was actually I think it was very unusual that I was recruited and appointed and not elected. And it was the same thing. It was my condition. I said, I need to recruit my team, else I'm not going. And what I did was that, I took people that had been part of the preparation organization. So it's good to have people who are already in favor. And they're not going to be less critical for the reason that they like the idea. They will still be critical. But it was really important. And then I asked, of course, proposals from the schools and things like that. But I also interviewed them really carefully. I used some recruitment agents also to do what companies do for recruitment. And there were not many mistakes in that process. And then for professors to keep the talent, recruitment it's so important. So you may absolutely no compromises with recruitment. And this was also very difficult for some professors. Yeah, but this guy has been with me so long and he needs to be promoted. And the thing is that We had a promotion and recruitment committee, which was our best professors. But I made all the tenure decisions because I said, this is a decision that binds the university resources for the next 20 years. And the committee was very responsible. So they were able to pick the talent. They didn't make any compromises. And I think I had maybe 1 or 2 decisions that I had to return to the committee over the time. But it's again, delegate, give people responsibility, and make sure that the money is used in the right way. Yeah.
We have one final question, and it actually overlaps really nicely with the question that I had. So Selahattin has put a question to you, which is entrepreneurship is a key topic in Turkey, but the concept of entrepreneurial university is not fully understood. If you were to start from scratch, what steps would you take to strengthen the university's focus on entrepreneurship, which aligns with my question, which is what are some steps that you'd recommend to like a leader in this sort of a situation?
One thing that I would do, and what I did also when we were creating this entrepreneurial culture, mainly based on research, is to look in the history. Universities have always been entrepreneurial. But, the thing is that when universities spin out something, the first time that they spin out something, the media and the society might actually know that there's something. When they are unicorns, nobody remembers where they come from. So I would basically, and that's what I did also, what we did, in the leadership team was that we were looking at good examples of what had come out. If you look at Nokia, most of the engineers were coming either from Aalto University predecessors or Oulu University. All the talent that was actually necessary for making creating this fantastic company, university products. So it's not so foreign to universities to be entrepreneurial. The problem is that, you can't ask them to be entrepreneurial tomorrow. You have to wait 10 years. Some of my industrial friends, when I started at Aalto, they said, now you have 100 days to turn the course. And I said, I'm more thinking about 25 years. The quarter in a university is 25 years, not a quarter of a year.
That illustrates the complexities of universities quite beautifully. Tuula, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. Really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope that all those that were present today and will be listening on the podcast have enjoyed it as well. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion. Follow UIN on LinkedIn, and if you are enjoying our podcast, make sure to subscribe, rate and review in your podcast platform of choice to help other people find this content too.